So let's talk a little bit about your cutting board. First of all, you need to use a cutting board. Don't cut on a countertop for two reasons. One is, of course, you could damage your countertop. And even if it is, say, rock, it's going to be harder than your knife potentially. It's going to ruin the knife edge very quickly. So you want a cutting board made of material that's designed for a knife edge. And that's either plastic or wood. My general preference is towards wood because it is a bit softer, a little bit more forgiving on the knife, and because there's a bit more friction, and I just kind of like the feel of a wood cutting board for the most part, but a plastic cutting board would be fine as well. The next thing is you want to position the cutting board correctly, which basically you should be upright facing the cutting board, and it should be right to the edge of your countertop, ideally, right like that. The other thing is that it shouldn't slip and slide around. This one has really nice rubber feet, so it's actually really quite stable by itself. But if you have a cutting board that slips and slides around, what you want to do is take a dishcloth, probably, just moisten it and fold it up and stick it underneath your cutting board, and that provides us kind of a sticky surface for it to be on. That would be one option anyway. The next thing is holding your knife, and this is where a lot of people make a mistake. This is not a way to hold the knife. Nobody would recommend this who knows what they're talking about, I don't think, anywhere in the world. There might be somebody, I mean, you can get good at doing anything, I guess, so there's probably some amazing people that are like world-class chefs that cut like this, but that's never how they teach in chef school, I know that for sure. There's really two ways. One is to grip the handle like that, and I think generally, most of the time, what you're going to be taught is to grip it at the base of the knife right there, and that gives you really good control. Means that that you're able to be very precise about exactly where the knife is at any given moment, and so holding the knife in a stable way is very important. And then when you're cutting, there's a couple of things to think of. One is that if the blade is pointed towards your finger, it's going to be able to cut your finger, right? That blade could cut my finger. I'm not going to have my fingers outstretched, but if I'm not paying attention for a moment and my finger comes out and the blade is like that, chop, off comes a little bit of my finger. And it's happened. So the way to avoid that, number one, is to have the blade angled just slightly towards your hand. That way, if you especially have your hand in the correct position, which we'll talk about, it means that the knife blade is going to bump your hand, and the sharp edge is going to be that way. It's going to be away from your fingers rather than like this, which even if your finger bumps there, the blade is still, the sharp edge is closer down here than it is where you're bumping. So it's important to angle the blade just a little bit. This is often not taught when you look at other resources on knife skills, but this is one of the things that I learned in chef school, and I think it's probably one of the most important safety hints that has saved my fingers over and over again. So holding it firmly so that you're in full control, having the blade angled slightly towards your hand. I'm a lefty, so it's this way. If you're right-handed, of course, it would be this way. The other thing is the position of your hand. Fingertips are usually what end up getting in the way when you're cutting, and you want to get them out of the way through the whole process. So when you're cutting with your chef knife, number one thing, make sure that whatever it is you're cutting is stable. If it's rolling around, like this celery, it rolls this way, but it's stable this way. So I'd always choose to cut this way. and then manageable pieces. I might decide, for instance, to cut the celery like that so that I have two pieces instead of one. That makes it a little easier to cut. So with that in mind, I'm going to make sure that my vegetable is stable, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to think of it this way. You've got your thumb and your little finger pinching like that, and then these fingers are just they're kind of like the conveyor belt that's going to move the food towards the blade, or you're going to move this way. It's sometimes one way, sometimes the other. But essentially what you're going to do is you're going to curl your fingers, kind of like a claw, and it's called a claw grip, I believe. But you're going to curl your fingers, and then your middle finger is going to be there to bump against the knife blade so that it stops the knife from going close enough to be able to cut your hand. And then the key to using the chef knife is the major cutting skill is going to be this motion here. You're going to rock the blade like that, and you're going to move it forward like that. The pressure is generally on the downstroke like that. So it's like using a nano saw, a micro saw on the edge of the vegetable or meat that you're cutting. And it's a really good idea to take the time to just practice this until you develop that muscle memory where you can start doing this quite quickly. You got to get it high enough, and you should always have that rocking motion. If you do that, instead of just chop, 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 you're going to miss a lot of spots and have to recut. If you do this, you'll find that you're going to be more successful with each cut, and in the end, you're going to be able to gradually get faster with it. Start off slow, and again, your thumb and little finger like that, and then the claw is like that, and you're going to slice, 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 and start slow and just watch what you're doing. Follow all the way through. A little bit exaggerated here, but it's to show how you're cutting all the way through. You're not leaving any remnants. You're able to get quite close with your hand because your blade is tipped a little bit this way, and you can start to gradually move your veggies off to the side like that. You stop periodically, and then as time goes on, you're going to get faster and faster. And just always remember that good technique with the blade a little bit this way and the fingers curled, and that middle finger becomes kind of like your guide. You could do this with your eyes closed, and it would be safe because that middle finger is there. The fingers are curled over, the blade is pointed towards you, and there's really very little chance. I mean, I don't know how in the world you could do it. If you're doing this correctly, you're basically going to get through your whole vegetable without having to even really look. But, of course you're going to look because you're seeing the thickness of the slices. You're gauging that. But you can get through a lot of vegetable this way if you practice. And at the end, you always slow down, because at the end now you're losing some of that claw grip as you're moving the last little bit of the vegetable, so you want to be very careful and observe each slice. So, and then it's important as you're preparing a meal, you're thinking about making sure things are getting organized. So you're going to develop a mise en place, which means putting everything in its place. That's the most important thing when it comes to making a meal, is to have a good mise en place. So that now becomes part of my meal. I can continue slicing away like I did. And again, I'm not a chef. I'm not an expert. I'm a bumbler, but a bumbler who takes the time can eventually get pretty good at this, and to the point where I'm not sure that I would keep my job if I was at a restaurant prepping food. I think I'm, reasonably useful with a knife at this point because of practicing that one. That's the most basic skill in using a chef's knife.